I heard you say there's no swing instructor going to tell him how he feels hitting a golf ball. He's got to figure that out.
Can't. Tiger Woods is Tiger Woods. He hasn't lost his talent. First of all, he's never had an instructor that could beat him. How the hell can you listen to somebody you can't beat?
There is a man in golf who looked another player dead in the eye and basically called him a loser. Not quietly. Not behind closed doors. He said it out loud for the entire world to hear. And the thing that made it hit so hard is that the man saying it had every single right to say it. When Lee Trevino calls someone too arrogant for this game, that is not a cheap shot from the stands. That is a verdict from a man who built his entire life and career on one unbreakable rule. Earn it first, then talk. Trevino was born with nothing in Garland, Texas. He came up through caddy sheds and gambling circuits across El Paso, served in the United States Marine Corps, and taught himself every part of his golf game from the ground up without a single coach. No guru, no system. Just the dirt, the feel in his hands, and thousands of hours of hard, honest work. He went on to win 6 major championships and 29 PGA Tour events. So when a man like that looks at 5 of the most famous names in professional golf and says, they crossed a line, you had better pay attention. If this kind of straight talking, no sugarcoat golf content is your thing, use the hype feature right now and give this video some hype while we get into the first name. Today we are going from number 5 all the way down to number 1. The further down the list we go, the more personal the story gets, and the deeper the Trevino standard cuts. By the time we reach number 1, you will understand exactly what Lee Trevino believes separates the great ones from the arrogant ones. Number 5, Phil Mickelson. We start here because this is the most recent flashpoint and probably the one that made Trevino the angriest. Cast your mind back to 2014. The Ryder Cup was held at Gleneagles in Scotland. Tom Watson was the United States captain. He had spent 2 years preparing for that job. 2 years of meetings, planning, and dedication to a team he genuinely believed in, and the Americans still lost. The final score was 16.5 to 11.5 in favor of Europe. It was a bad result, a painful one. But what happened immediately after the last putt dropped turned a tough loss into something far worse. Phil Mickelson walked into the post-tournament press conference and publicly tore Tom Watson apart. In front of cameras, reporters, and a live global audience, Mickelson criticized Watson's leadership decisions and tactics. He talked about the pod system that Paul Azinger had used back in 2008 and how that approach worked better. He made it clear, without too much ambiguity, that Watson had done it the wrong way. Now here is where Trevino came in, because there is a number you need to keep in mind. At that point, Mickelson had been part of 10 Ryder Cup teams, 10 appearances, and in those 10 appearances, he had won just twice. His match record was 16 wins, 19 losses, and 6 halves, a winning percentage sitting at 46.3. He had lost more than he had won across a decade of Ryder Cups. Trevino was direct about it. He told Golf Channel that Mickelson's behavior was reprehensible. He said Mickelson could say whatever he liked, but he felt it would have landed better coming from a player like Patrick Reed, who had gone 3 wins, 0 losses, and 1 half in that same tournament, rather than from someone who had been part of so many losing campaigns. Then came the line that cut straight to the bone. Trevino said simply, "If I had a losing record in the Ryder Cup, I would keep my mouth shut." Consider Trevino's own Ryder Cup history alongside that statement. 6 appearances, 17 wins, 7 losses, 6 halves. A winning percentage of 66.7. His team never lost when he was in the side, not once in 6 tries. So when he tells Mickelson to stay quiet, he is not being cruel. He is stating a principle that sits at the very foundation of his worldview. The right to publicly criticize belongs to those who have earned it through results. Mickelson's record had not earned him that right, and Tom Watson, who had poured 2 years of his life into that captaincy, deserved far better than to be humiliated on camera by a player with a losing record. That is number 5. The arrogance Trevino identified here was not loud or dramatic. It was the quiet assumption that a losing record still entitles you to an opinion. Trevino had no time for that. Number 4, Tiger Woods. Now we move from professional arrogance into something more personal, something that lives inside the mind. With Mickelson, the issue was loyalty. With Tiger Woods, the issue was self-reliance and what happens when you lose trust in your own game. Trevino was a vocal critic of Tiger's reliance on a long succession of swing coaches throughout his career. Butch Harmon was first, from 1993 to 2003, and Trevino felt that era worked because Harmon respected Tiger's natural feel and power. Then came Hank Haney from 2004 to 2010, pushing things in a more mechanical direction. Sean Foley followed from 2010 to 2014, a period Trevino described as one of clear confusion in Tiger's swing. Then Chris Como arrived in 2014, and by that point, Trevino had heard enough. In 2014, Trevino said it out loud. He stated that Tiger is only going to come back if he does not get another guru. Because if he gets another guru, that person is going to start changing him again, and he has got to swing the way that person swings. Trevino said Tiger has got to do this on his own. That statement captures everything Trevino stands for. He grew up taking it out of the ground. His game came from feel, from repetition, from an honest relationship between his hands and the club. No outside voice told him how to do it. He worked it out himself, and he believed that the truly great players, the Ben Hogans, the Jack Nicklauses of the sport, arrived at their best golf through thousands of hours of solitary practice, not through a new set of technical prescriptions every 2 or 3 years. What confused Trevino most was something he observed in Tiger's game during that difficult period. Tiger would hit a bad shot when his swing felt comfortable and a good shot when it felt uncomfortable. To Trevino, that was a signal of a player who had been so deeply intellectualized by coaches that he had completely lost touch with his natural instincts. That disconnection, in Trevino's view, was its own form of arrogance. The belief that you can rebuild and manufacture greatness through constant outside instruction, rather than trusting the immense talent already living inside you. And there was a telling moment that Trevino brought up publicly. When Chris Como reportedly called Trevino asking for advice on chipping, Trevino made sure people knew about it. His point was simple. If the man teaching the greatest golfer in the world needs to call someone else for answers, what exactly is the value of the whole guru arrangement? Number 3, Bernhard Langer. Now we shift from mental arrogance to social arrogance, the kind that does not say a word but costs everyone around it an enormous amount of time. Bernhard Langer is a 2-time Masters champion and a genuinely brilliant golfer. His record speaks clearly, but across his career, Langer built a very different kind of reputation among his peers. He was known as one of the slowest players in the professional game, and Trevino had a line for it that became one of the most quoted barbs in all of golf. He was clean-shaven when we teed off. That is Trevino saying that by the time the round was over, Langer had been moving so slowly that the man had grown a beard in the time it took to finish 18 holes. It is a funny line, but what is sitting beneath it is not funny at all. It is a serious accusation. Langer received a 500-pound fine at the 1985 Players' Championship for slow play on the final hole. Given the prize pools on offer at that level of the game, 500 was essentially meaningless. It changed nothing. At the 1995 Ryder Cup, Paul Azinger suggested that the pairing of Langer and Nick Faldo would need a same-day rule, meaning you would have to start the match the day before if you wanted any chance of finishing it on time. Golf Punk magazine went further, naming Langer the slowest player in the history of professional golf, and when Langer eventually moved to the Champions Tour for senior play, those who had to compete alongside him noted that the pace had not improved one bit. Trevino came from a world where the pace of play was a psychological tool. Gambling matches in El Paso were not conducted in a 5-hour bubble. You moved, you played, and you kept the game flowing. In that environment, dragging your feet was a sign of weakness. So when Trevino sees a professional golfer taking an age over every shot, treating every putt like it carries the weight of the universe, he does not see dedication or professionalism. He sees arrogance, the quiet, fussy arrogance of a player who believes the entire world should pause and hold its breath while they find their perfect preparation. Trevino claimed he had no pride on the hole. His job was to put the ball in the cup and move to the next tee. Clean, simple, fast. Langer, in his view, had forgotten that the game belongs to everyone on the course, not just the man taking longest to play it. Number 2, Mac O'Grady. Here's where the arrogance gets almost painfully self-destructive. Mac O'Grady was one of the most technically extraordinary golfers of his era. He could play equally well right-handed and left-handed. His golf swing was considered by many observers to be as close to mechanical perfection as anything the sport had ever produced. He was a genuine marvel, but O'Grady spent years locked in a bitter conflict with the PGA Tour and its commissioner, Dean Beeman. The heart of it was this. O'Grady believed he was right, the institution believed he was wrong, and O'Grady refused to back down, even as the fines and suspensions piled up and his career quietly began to unravel. Trevino's advice cut straight to the point. He told O'Grady, "You can afford to swallow your pride and take your medicine." Trevino was not saying the system was fair. He understood institutional politics better than most. He had faced resistance from the establishment from his first day on tour. He knew what it felt like to be treated as an outsider, to be the man who did not quite fit the image of what professional golf was supposed to look like. But instead of burning everything down in a war he could not win alone, Trevino found a smarter path. He used humor. He used the Merry Mex persona. He outplayed every room he walked into and let the scorecards make his argument for him. O'Grady could not find that path. His conviction in his own technical and moral correctness was absolute, and Trevino saw that conviction as the ultimate luxury a professional golfer cannot afford. Pride is wonderful in private. On a tour card, when suspensions cost you starts and fines cost you income, pride becomes a slow leak that eventually drains everything. A golfer with the most perfect swing in the world who cannot play because he is suspended is no golfer at all. Trevino believed that even the most gifted players must occasionally accept the medicine the institution hands them, not because the institution is always right, but because your career is more important than your point. O'Grady had the ability to compete with the very best. He simply never found a way to compete with his own pride. Number 1. Tony Jacklin. This is the one. This is where everything Trevino stands for comes into sharpest focus. The story goes back to 1972 and the Open Championship at Muirfield in Scotland, but it sits at number 1 because the lesson inside it is the deepest of them all. Trevino was the defending champion. He had won the Open the year before and was back to defend his title. Tony Jacklin was the British hero, one of the finest players in the world at that time, and carrying the hopes of an entire nation on his shoulders. By the final round on that Sunday, these two men were locked together at the top of the leaderboard. Before they walked to the first tee, Jacklin turned to Trevino and said, "Lee, I do not want to talk today." Trevino looked back at him without missing a beat. "I do not want you to talk. I just want you to listen." That is the line. And what makes it extraordinary is how much it reveals about what Trevino truly believed. When Jacklin asked for quiet, he was not just making a personal request about his own focus. He was trying to dictate the terms of the battle before it had even started. He wanted a version of that final round that suited him. A controlled, silent environment where he could manage his concentration without the noise and chatter Trevino was famous for producing. To Trevino, that was arrogance. Not the shouting kind, the polite kind, the kind that smiles and says, "Would you mind changing the way you compete so that I feel more comfortable?" Trevino used his voice as a weapon. His talk, his jokes, his relentless commentary. It was part of how he managed his own rhythm and kept competitors slightly off balance. Jacklin was asking him to put that weapon down. Trevino had no intention of doing any such thing. The par 5 17th hole settled it all. Both men were tied at the top. Jacklin was 15 feet from the cup, looking at a genuine birdie chance. Trevino was in the rough at the back of the green in a position that looked impossible, and then Trevino chipped it into the hole. From the rough under the most suffocating pressure imaginable, he holed out for par. Jacklin could not handle what he had just witnessed. He three-putted from 15 feet and dropped a shot, from tied at the top with 2 holes left to trailing by 1 in a matter of minutes. The championship was gone. Trevino finished at 278 and won by a single stroke, successfully defending his Open title, a feat that had not been achieved since Arnold Palmer back in 1962. Afterwards, Trevino declared himself the greatest chipper in the world. Some people raised an eyebrow at that, but Trevino would have called it a simple fact. He had holed out 4 times during that tournament. The numbers backed the claim. That is the Trevino way. You earn the right to say it, then you say it. So there they are. 5 names, 5 very different faces of the same problem. Phil Mickelson opened his mouth when his record should have kept it shut. Tiger Woods handed his game to an endless rotation of coaches when his own feel and instinct were more than enough. Bernhard Langer moved through every round like time belonged to him personally and the rest of the field could wait. Mac O'Grady chose the luxury of being right over the reality of staying relevant. And Tony Jacklin tried to shape the terms of a championship before the first shot of the final round had even been struck. 5 different styles of arrogance, one consistent standard holding them all accountable. Trevino never believed that humility was a weakness. He saw it as what happens naturally when a player truly understands the game. Golf does not care about your reputation. It does not care what you have won before, how famous your name is, or how many people are watching. The ball still needs to go in the hole. The card still needs to be signed. And if you start believing that your ego entitles you to special treatment, the course will correct you with a ruthlessness that no coach or guru or press conference can soften. That is what Trevino spent his career protecting. Spent his, not just his own record, the integrity of a game that demands you earn every single thing it gives you. Confidence is not arrogance when it is backed by results. The players who understand that are the ones who last and leave something worth remembering behind them. The ones who forget it end up as cautionary tales. And that is Lee Trevino's greatest contribution to this game. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment below and tell us which of these 5 moments hit hardest. Was it the line about keeping your mouth shut? Was it the chip in at 17? Was it the guru speech? Let us know what you think.
What Jack and Gary have done, and you have to win the Masters.
Big name missing from here, someone who's been associated with this tournament, Tiger Woods.
Well, obviously the main impact is that the ratings for TV shows are down. He has a great impact on the ratings. He increases the ratings.
Tom Watson said it plainly. These men had no integrity. He did not whisper it. He did not keep it behind closed doors. He said it to journalists, wrote it in open letters, and once confronted a fellow champion face to face on a dirt road in the Arizona desert. Golf is a game built on honesty. It is one of the only sports in the world where the players call their own penalties. No referee stands behind every shot. No video official watches every move. The rules trust you to police yourself. That trust is not just tradition. It is identity. It is the invisible contract between every golfer and the game they play. For decades, one man has been willing to say out loud he thinks that contract has been broken. Tom Watson has looked some of golf's most famous names in the eye, and he has told them the same thing. You had no integrity. He accused one of them of cheating in front of a rules official and a journalist. He challenged another in a published letter that shook the entire institution of professional golf to its core. He said the words publicly, clearly, and without apology. Because for Watson, the game has always been worth the discomfort. Watson is an 8-time major champion. He has won 5 Open championships. He has stood on the leaderboard in the most pressurized moments the sport can offer, and he has delivered. But beyond the trophies and the records, Watson has built something rarer and more lasting. He has become the moral conscience of professional golf. The man who says the things others are too polite to say. The man who looks at a fellow champion and tells him, in front of the whole world, that what he did was wrong 8 times. In very public ways, Watson has pointed at the biggest names in golf and declared the same verdict. They failed the game. They damaged what made it great. They showed no integrity. If this kind of deep golf story is what you came for, use the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It helps other fans find this content and it genuinely makes a difference. Now let us keep going. Those 8 names are not obscure players you have never heard of. They are legends, Hall of Famers, major winners, men with tens of millions of fans around the world. But Watson saw something in each of them that he could not leave unanswered. Something that was quietly chipping away at the very thing that makes golf different from every other professional sport. Today we go through all 8 cases, every moment, every accusation, every quote. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why Tom Watson has been called the most important moral voice in the history of modern golf, and why so many of the sport's biggest stars have felt the full force of his judgment. 8 names, 8 stories. Let us open the first case. To understand why Watson's words carry so much weight, you have to understand what makes golf different in the first place. In almost every major professional sport, there are officials whose entire job is to enforce the rules. In basketball, a referee blows a whistle. In football, a flag gets thrown. In cricket, the umpire raises a finger. But golf does not work that way. Golf is a largely self-governed sport. The expectation has always been that you know the rules and that you follow them without being told. You call your own penalties. You do not move your ball. You do not improve your lie. You do not take an advantage that was not fairly earned. The game trusts you. And that trust is not a small thing. It is the entire foundation. Bobby Jones, one of the most revered figures in golf history, once called a penalty on himself during a major championship when nobody else saw the infraction. He could have said nothing. He would have won without any consequences. But he called it. When praised for his honesty later, Jones reportedly said he might as well be praised for not robbing a bank. To him, calling that penalty was not heroism or remarkable virtue. It was simply what you were supposed to do. It was the minimum the game required. That philosophy runs through the entire culture of the sport, and it is the standard Watson was raised on. His role models were men like Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, and Jack Nicklaus, men whose records on the course were matched by their reputations away from it, men who understood that how you won mattered just as much as whether you won. Watson absorbed all of that. He did not just become a champion, he became a custodian of the values those men lived by. When Watson talks about integrity, he is actually talking about several things at once. You follow the rules exactly as written. You do not improve your lie. You do not touch growing vegetation behind your ball to gain an advantage. The letter of the rulebook is not negotiable, and it is not subject to personal interpretation on the course. The second layer is behavioral. Champion carries himself with dignity at all times. He does not throw clubs on the 16th fairway. He does not swear at the gallery. He does not conduct himself in a way that embarrasses the traditions of the game in front of a watching public. The third layer is institutional. You are loyal to the tours and organizations that gave you your career, that provided the stages on which you built your reputation. And the fourth layer, the deepest and most serious one, is moral. Where does your money come from? Who are you choosing to be in business with? What does that choice say about your values and your character? For Watson, integrity means all 4 layers simultaneously. That is a demanding standard, an exceptionally high bar, and Watson has applied it consistently across more than 4 decades in professional golf. He has not chosen silence to protect friendships. And he has not looked the other way to avoid controversy. He has spoken up every single time he believed the game was being damaged. That is the man whose judgments we are about to examine. The most recent and most dramatic chapter in this story did not happen in the 1980s. It happened in 2024. At the Masters, the most prestigious tournament in the world, Watson sat down and spoke about the state of professional golf. What he described was not triumph, it was grief. Talked about players who used to sit together at the Champions Dinner at Augusta, sharing stories, sharing laughs, sharing the rare feeling of belonging to something much greater than themselves. He said that feeling was gone. He said the togetherness had vanished. His words were quiet, but they landed hard. Because they came from a man who had actually lived that brotherhood, and then watched it slowly dissolve around him. That sense of loss had been building for years before the 2024 Masters. In June of 2023, Watson did something that surprised even the people who knew him well. He wrote an open letter directly to PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan and the Tour's policy board. It is one of the most significant documents produced about professional golf in the modern era. In it, Watson did not simply express disappointment or ask polite questions. He made a direct accusation. He said that both the players who had defected to LIV Golf and the Tour leadership itself shown a lack of integrity. LIV Golf was a breakaway competition funded by the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, known as the PIF. The PGA Tour had previously argued, loudly and publicly, that taking money from that source was a moral issue. The Tour pointed to the Saudi government's alleged connection to the September 11th attacks, a claim the kingdom denies, but one that remains a central concern for groups like 9/11 Families United. Watson had agreed with that moral position. He saw the players who stayed loyal to the Tour as standing on the right side of a clear ethical line, and then the Tour reversed course. It pursued a merger with the very organization it had spent years condemning on moral grounds. Watson called it hypocrisy. He asked how the Tour could look the families of September 11th victims in the eye after everything that had been publicly stated. He questioned the transparency of the leadership, the fairness to the players who had stayed loyal, and the entire direction the institution was heading. His letter exposed a concern that went far beyond golf strategy or business decisions. It was a question about the soul of the sport. That letter was the clearest statement Watson had ever made as the game's moral guardian. It showed that his concern was not just about individual players breaking rules on a golf course in a single tournament. It was about the entire institution losing something that could not be bought back. The money flooding into the game from state-funded sources was, in Watson's view, eroding the very foundation that made professional golf worth watching and worth caring about. Now we rewind, because the 8 names Watson has challenged over the years tell the full story of how we arrived at this moment. Each one represents a different kind of failure, a different way the game's integrity was tested and, in Watson's view, found wanting. Let us go through them one by one. Number 1. Brooks Koepka. Brooks Koepka is one of the most decorated major champions of his generation. 4 major titles, a sustained period of dominance that few players in the history of the sport have managed to replicate. When LIV Golf came calling, Koepka answered. He signed with the breakaway tour funded by the Saudi Public Investment Fund and walked away from the PGA Tour. For many observers, that was simply a personal business decision. For Watson, it represented something far larger than any individual contract. Watson's 2024 Masters comments focused specifically on what Koepka's departure meant for the culture of the game. He talked about the Champions Dinner at Augusta, acknowledged that private gathering of past Masters champions that takes place each year before the tournament begins. Decades, it was a sacred tradition. Champions from different eras, different countries, different generations of the sport, all sitting together in a single room, sharing meals, sharing stories. Watson loved that tradition because it was the clearest expression of the togetherness he believed was central to professional golf at its highest level. With Koepka on LIV, that dinner carried a different energy. The fracture Watson described was not administrative. It was felt in the room. Watson said it directly. "We want to get together like we were at that Champions Dinner. Right now, we don't have it." Those words were not just about seating arrangements or awkward silences. They were a statement about what was lost when men who shared that rare distinction chose the money over the fellowship. Watson's case against Koepka is rooted in the concept of stature. Argued consistently that the stature of the PGA Tour, built over generations by the greatest players in the history of the sport, worth more than any financial offer that LIV could place on the table. Koepka had the wins, the platform, standing to be a genuine leader during a pivotal moment in the game's history. Instead, Watson believes he walked away from all of that. In doing so, he contributed to a fracture that Watson feels the sport has still not recovered from. The talent was never in question, but the choices a player makes when the game needs its champions most tell their own kind of story. For Watson, Koepka had a chance to be a defining voice for the sport's future. Instead, he became a symbol of the fracture Watson had feared was coming, as a legacy that no number of major trophies can completely erase. Number 2, Dustin Johnson. If Brooks Koepka's case is about fractured fellowship, Dustin Johnson's case is about something Watson considers even more fundamental: loyalty, and the question of what kind of money you are willing to accept, and from whom. Dustin Johnson was among the very first PGA Tour stars to sign with LIV Golf. He was not a reluctant late arrival. He was an early defector, one of the players who gave the breakaway league the credibility it needed at the most critical moment of its existence. And for Watson, that timing and that decision mattered enormously. Johnson is a two-time major champion and a former world #1. He built his career, his reputation, and his entire brand within the structure of the PGA Tour. Every opportunity he had, every sponsorship he earned, every ranking point he accumulated, every dollar he made before LIV came along came from the platform the tour provided. And then, when an enormous financial offer arrived from a league funded by the Saudi Public Investment Fund, Watson accepted it without hesitation. Watson's critique of Johnson is focused squarely on loyalty and on what Watson sees as a failure to properly consider the ethical implications of that choice. He asked the question plainly, is the money really worth the loss of the stature of the PGA Tour? For Watson, that is not a rhetorical question. He genuinely believes that if you think about it seriously, if you weigh the stature of the institution against a financial figure, the answer should be obvious. The stature wins. Watson's position is also rooted in something that goes beyond loyalty to a business institution. For him, the question of where the money comes from is inseparable from the question of integrity. LIV's funding came from a source carrying serious ethical questions, questions that the tour itself had raised loudly. Watson believed those questions did not disappear because the numbers on a contract were very large. He believed every player who accepted that money was making a statement about what they valued and who they were willing to align themselves with. Johnson made his choice. Watson made his view clear, and the gap between those two positions is exactly what Watson has been arguing about for his entire career. Some choices define a player beyond the sport itself. For Watson, taking that money from that source at that moment in history was one of them. Number 3. Bryson DeChambeau. Bryson DeChambeau arrived on the PGA Tour as something the sport had never quite seen before. A physics major, a man who approached golf like a scientist, questioning every convention, seeking every advantage through data, equipment modifications, and sheer physical transformation. For many fans, that approach was exciting. For Tom Watson, it was a source of growing unease long before DeChambeau ever signed with a rival tour. Before DeChambeau joined LIV, Watson had already been watching his interactions with the sport's governing bodies with quiet concern. DeChambeau had developed a reputation for pushing against equipment standards and challenging officials in ways that Watson felt demonstrated a lack of respect for the traditions and the governing structures of the game. The humility that Watson considers a core requirement of any true champion was not something he recognized clearly in the way DeChambeau operated. When DeChambeau eventually defected to LIV, Watson's critique became more direct and more existential. He was not simply questioning a business decision, he was questioning what the pattern of choices said about the direction of the entire game. Where is the honor? Where is the integrity? We have a problem in our game. That was Watson's statement, not aimed at one player in isolation, but triggered in significant part by watching men like DeChambeau leave the sport's traditional structure behind. DeChambeau's approach to golf, for all its technical innovation, represents something Watson views as a deeper cultural problem. It is the idea that the game is a system to be optimized and exploited rather than a tradition to be honored and passed on. You can push every boundary, argue with every official, challenge every convention, and then simply move on to the next opportunity without ever considering what you owe the sport. Watson believes that attitude is corrosive, that it models the wrong values for every junior golfer who watches from the stands. The honor Watson talks about is not about being old-fashioned or resistant to change. It is about recognizing that the game existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. Your job as a professional is not just to win. It is to add to the game's dignity rather than subtract from it. Watson's view, DeChambeau's pattern of behavior, culminating in his decision to join LIV, placed him firmly on the wrong side of that ledger. Number 4. Patrick Reed. Patrick Reed stands apart from every other name on this list for one important reason. His integrity issues have nothing to do with LIV Golf, rival tours, or geopolitical funding sources. His case is about something far more basic and far more personal. The rules of the game, the ones every golfer is supposed to follow. They're supposed to follow especially when nobody else is watching. And in Reed's case, even when everybody was watching. Reed's history with rules controversies did not begin when he turned professional. There were questions before that. The most documented and most damaging incident from his professional career came at the 2019 Hero World Challenge in the Bahamas. Reed was filmed by a television camera in the act of improving his lie in a waste area. He smoothed the sand behind his ball with his hand on 2 separate practice swings, which is a direct violation of the rules of golf. He was penalized 2 strokes. He disputed it, and the golf world watched with wide eyes. For Watson, Reed represents the most fundamental kind of integrity failure the game can produce. There is no complicated layer of geopolitics here, no debate about institutional loyalty or the source of a tour's funding. Just the simplest question in the sport. Do you follow the rules when the cameras are pointing at you? In Reed's case, even that basic standard was not met. Watson has been entirely direct about this standard. The rules are what they are. You have to be honest with yourself and the game. That sentence is short. It is simple, but it contains everything Watson believes about the spirit of golf. You do not need an official monitoring your every move. You do not need a camera crew present. You are supposed to know the rules and apply them to yourself, accurately and honestly, in every single situation the game puts in front of you. The phrase honest with yourself is the most revealing part. Watson is not just talking about external enforcement, talking about internal character. A player who repeatedly finds themselves at the center of rules controversies is not just encountering bad luck. In Watson's view, they are failing the most personal test the game presents. Test of the internal moral compass, the ability to recognize what is right even when doing it costs you something. That is the standard that has defined the greatest figures in golf history. And by that standard, Patrick Reed has repeatedly come up short. Watson's point is not that Reed is uniquely terrible as a person. It is that in a sport built entirely on self-governance, a pattern of rules controversies is a pattern of character. And patterns do not lie. Number 5. Sergio Garcia. Sergio Garcia has been one of European golf's most celebrated figures for the better part of 3 decades. Ryder Cup icon, a player of breathtaking natural skill who finally captured the 2017 Masters and proved he had the talent to win the game's most important titles. Watson's view of Garcia is shaped not just by what Garcia achieved, but by how he chose to carry himself along the way. The friction between Watson and Garcia goes back to the 2014 Ryder Cup at Gleneagles, where Watson served as the United States captain. That was a difficult week. The Americans lost to Europe in a match that exposed tensions within the U.S. team. Garcia, as one of Europe's most combative and passionate players, at the center of the competition's most charged moments. Watson's criticism of Garcia's conduct was rooted in what he saw as a consistent pattern of volatility. A player who could be brilliant and captivating one moment and petulant and undisciplined the next, who wore his frustrations in ways that Watson felt were unbecoming of a player representing the game at the very highest level. The idea Watson keeps returning to when discussing Garcia is the concept of the golfer as a representative. When you pull on a national uniform at the Ryder Cup, you are not playing for yourself alone. You are representing the sport, your country, and the deep traditions of the competition. Watson believed Garcia's public outbursts and his emotional inconsistency were a failure to honor that responsibility properly. You owe the jersey more than that. You owe the game more than that. When Garcia eventually joined LIV Golf, Watson viewed it as the natural conclusion of a career that had consistently placed personal interests and personal emotions above the stature of the sport. Watson's words on Garcia captured his entire philosophy in one clean line. It's about the stature of the game, showing humility when you represent it. Garcia had been given every platform professional golf could offer. He had been celebrated and loved for decades. And in the end, Watson believes he chose personal gain over the institution that made him who he was. Garcia's case is a reminder that Watson's standard does not only apply to rules violations or financial choices. It applies to temperament, to how a player carries himself in difficult moments, to whether he can set aside personal frustration in the service of something bigger. By that measure, Watson found Garcia consistently wanting. Number 6, Phil Mickelson. Phil Mickelson is the most layered and complex case on this entire list. His relationship with Tom Watson has multiple distinct chapters, and each chapter adds another dimension to the question of what integrity truly means in professional golf. The first chapter begins at the 2014 Ryder Cup at Gleneagles. Watson was the American captain. The team lost to Europe in a result that was painful for everyone in the United States camp. And at the post-match press conference, Mickelson did something that many in golf considered a serious breach of the unwritten code the sport lives by. He stood up and publicly criticized Watson's captaincy in front of the assembled media. He aired grievances in public that almost every tradition in golf holds should be handled privately. You talk to the captain behind closed doors. You express your concerns quietly through the appropriate channels. You do not publicly undermine the man who led you by going on record at a press conference. For Watson, that was a direct violation of the loyalty code he had always believed should govern the relationship between a player and his captain. It was a public act of disloyalty, and Watson did not forget it. But the second chapter is larger and more serious. Mickelson did not merely defect to LIV Golf as one player among many. According to the research behind Watson's 2023 letter, Mickelson was the primary architect of the defection. He was the most recognizable and most influential player who helped give the breakaway league the credibility it needed during its critical early period. And that role, combined with all the moral questions surrounding LIV's funding source, placed Mickelson at the very center of Watson's most serious criticisms. Watson's 2023 open letter and his comments at the 2024 Masters were widely understood to be directed significantly at Mickelson's choices. Watson framed the failure in terms of the moral issue. The PGA Tour had argued for years that taking money from the Saudi Public Investment Fund was ethically unacceptable. Mickelson knew that argument. He had heard it stated publicly and repeatedly by tour leadership, and then he set it aside completely and took the money anyway. Watson put the contradiction plainly. I understand the cries of hypocrisy. Disregarding the moral issue is a position which, for a long time, was publicly highlighted by tour leadership. Mickelson did not act out of ignorance. He chose to discard a moral position he was fully aware of. That is a specific and deliberate kind of integrity failure. For Watson, who has spent his entire career insisting that the game demands more from its champions than talent and victories, it is one of the most deeply disappointing failures of all. Number 7. Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is the most famous golfer in the history of the sport. His dominance redefined what was thought possible in professional golf. And Tom Watson's critique of him is not about a rules violation on a specific hole or a contract signed with a rival tour. It is about something Watson considers equally important to all of those things. Responsibility that comes with being the most influential player the game has ever seen. By 2010, Woods was preparing to return to professional golf after a period of personal scandal that had consumed the sport's headlines for months. Watson chose not to make the personal scandal the focus of his critique. Instead, he focused on something more specific to the game itself. He focused on what he saw as a failure of stature in the way Woods had been conducting himself on the golf course. Watson's critique came during an interview in Dubai. He pointed to Woods' use of profanity on the course and his tendency to throw clubs when shots did not go the way he intended. To many casual observers, those were minor frustrations that any competitor might display in the heat of battle. To Watson, they were symptoms of a deeper problem, a failure to carry the full responsibility that came with being the most watched, most followed, most influential player in the history of the sport. Watson's argument rests on a clear and consistent principle. When you are the best player in the world, every junior golfer is watching how you behave. Every new fan forms their first impression of the sport based on how you carry yourself. Every television camera in the world is pointed at you. Your conduct does not represent just yourself. It represents every player who came before you and every player who will come after. Responsibility comes with the position, whether you want it or not. Did not accept that a player carrying the stature Woods had accumulated could behave in ways that Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, or Jack Nicklaus would not have recognized as befitting a champion. Said it directly, Tiger has to take ownership. He needs to clean up his act and show the respect for the game that other people before him have shown. Watson also suggested that Woods' public return should not come through a tournament, but a genuine and transparent conversation. He admitted his failures and committed to a different standard going forward. Ability and ownership were not optional for a player in Woods' position. Watson believed they were required. This critique marked a clear shift in how Watson was understood publicly. Before this moment, he had been known primarily as a technical enforcer of the rules. The Gary player confrontation had defined him in that role. But with Tiger, he became something else as well. He became an arbiter of character, of the way a champion must carry himself in the most watched moments of his sport. That distinction matters, because it tells you that the standard Watson applies is not only found in the rulebook, it is found in the soul of the game. Number 8, Gary player. Now we arrive at the case that started it all. The confrontation that first showed the world exactly who Tom Watson was and exactly what he was willing to risk to protect the integrity of the game he loved. The year was 1983. The event was the inaugural Skins game in the Arizona desert at Desert Highlands Golf Club. This was not an ordinary exhibition. It was one of the highest-paying events in golf at the time. The total purse was $360,000. Understand what that number meant. Consider this. The Masters champion that same year earned $90,000 for winning one of the most prestigious titles in all of sport. The Skins game was offering 4 times that amount in a short exhibition event. The 4 players competing were the biggest names of the era: Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, and Tom Watson. And the pressure to perform for that kind of money was real. The critical moment came at the 16th hole, a 240-yard par 3 where $120,000 in accumulated skins were sitting on the line. An enormous sum by any measure. Gary Player was preparing to play his second shot from the right side of the green when Watson observed an action that made him stop cold. Player reached down and removed a leaf from behind his ball. Player described it as a loose impediment, which is a category of material that the rules of golf permit you to remove. But Watson did not see a loose impediment. He saw a rooted leaf, growing weed. And under the rules of golf, you cannot remove anything that is fixed or growing in order to improve your lie or your line of play. That is one of the clearest rules the game has. Watson did not confront Player in the middle of the hole. He waited. He gathered himself. He was certain about what he had seen, and he was not going to act impulsively. After the round on a dirt road behind the 18th green, rules official Joe Day present and journalist Dave Anderson within earshot, Watson turned to Gary Player and delivered one of the most famous confrontations in golf history. "I'm accusing you, Gary. You can't do that. I'm tired of this. I wasn't watching you, but I saw it." Every word in that statement is deliberate. Accusing you is not a suggestion or a polite question. It is a direct, formal charge. "Tired of this" tells you everything about Watson's state of mind. He was not reacting to an isolated moment. He viewed this as part of a longer pattern of behavior he had been watching for years. And "I wasn't watching you, but I saw it" is perhaps the most extraordinary line of all. Watson was not conducting surveillance. He was not trying to catch anyone out. He simply happened to see what he saw, and he was not going to pretend otherwise, no matter how famous or respected the man in front of him was. Player called the accusation staggering. In his later writings, he described being accused of cheating as the most heinous charge you can lay against a golfer. He maintained that the leaf was loose and that he had followed the rules. No formal ruling was made against him. But Watson did not retract a single word. Yeah, he believed what he saw, he said it out loud, and he accepted every consequence that followed, including the awkwardness, the controversy, and the damage to a relationship that had existed for years. The money tells its own story, too. Player finished that event as the largest earner, taking home $170,000. Watson earned $10,000. He lost the financial battle completely. He walked away having said the truth as he saw it, one of the most celebrated golfers in the world in the most direct and unambiguous terms possible. No politics, no softening, no second thoughts. And for Watson, that was not a small thing. That was everything the game had ever asked him to be. Golf is one of the most enduring sports in the world. It has survived a great deal over the past century. Economic downturns, all with the passing of generations, the rise of enormous commercial forces. Every era has brought its own test to the game's integrity and its traditions. Every era has also produced people willing to stand up and say, "This is where the line is. This is what the game is worth." Tom Watson has been one of those people for more than 4 decades. He has given the sport cannot be measured in prize money or trophy counts. He has provided something far rarer, a consistent, principled, and fearless voice that says the game matters more than any individual player, any single contract, and any financial offer on the table. He has called out the greatest golfer who ever lived. He has faced a legend down on a dirt road in the desert. He has written an open letter that challenged the integrity of an entire institution. He has done all of it because he genuinely believes that what golf stands for is worth the discomfort of saying uncomfortable things. The standard Watson has established, what has come to be understood as the Watsonian standard, asks 4 things of every professional golfer. Follow the rules without exception. Carry yourself with dignity in every public moment. Stay loyal to the institutions that built your career. And be honest about the moral weight of the choices you make. That is a high bar. Very few players can clear it perfectly. Watson has never claimed the standard is easy. He has only ever said it is necessary. Golf is at a crossroads right now. The money in the game has never been larger. The commercial forces reshaping the sport are more powerful than anything past generations ever had to face. The fractures Watson described at the 2024 Masters are real and they are visible. They are felt in rooms that used to feel like sanctuaries of brotherhood. But the game has survived everything that has been thrown at it so far. It survived what happened on that dirt road in 1983. It survived the storm of 2010. It is navigating the LIV era. And at every difficult moment, the voices that mattered most were the ones brave enough to say what was right even when saying it was hard. Watson's hope, and the hope of every fan who cares about this game at its deepest level, the next generation of champions understand what is truly at stake. That winning alone is not the whole answer. Stature matters. That the way you win, the company you keep, the choices you are willing to live with publicly, and the things you are willing to protect say as much about you as any trophy you ever lift. The game gave Tom Watson everything he ever asked of it. In return, he gave the game this: a standard, a benchmark, a challenge to every player who follows. Names on his list will be debated for years, the arguments will continue. But the standard itself, the insistence that the game demands more than talent, more than trophies, more than contracts, that standard is not going anywhere. The question he leaves behind has never been complicated. It is the same question it has always been in golf. Can you meet that?
I've tried to get a hold of Tiger and his manager, and he just didn't want to talk to anybody.
John Daly never learned to keep his mouth shut. That's not a criticism. It's the whole point. While most tour pros give you carefully managed non-answers and PR-approved smiles, Daly just talks. And when Daly talks about the guys he's shared a locker room, a tee box, or a beef with over the years, the names he reaches for aren't random. They're the biggest names in the game. The ones who, in his view, forgot that golf is still just a sport played by human beings. Here are 6 golfers John Daly has called out for being too arrogant, starting with the biggest name of all. Nobody dominated professional golf the way Tiger Woods did. 14 major championships. A win rate that made other tour pros feel like they were competing for second place. A physical presence on a golf course that genuinely changed the atmosphere before he hit a single shot. The numbers are real, the greatness is real, and nobody who watched him in his prime is going to pretend otherwise. But John Daly isn't talking about the numbers. What Daly keeps coming back to, in interviews and offhand comments spread across years, is the person inside all that dominance. The way Tiger carried himself around other players. The distance he kept. The sense that the game existed to serve Tiger, not the other way around. Daly put it plainly, "I'm not like Tiger. I talk to people." That line sounds simple, but it carries a lot of weight when you understand what Daly means by it. Daly built his entire public identity on accessibility. He signed every autograph, took every photo, sat in the parking lot and drank with fans after rounds. He played like someone who genuinely enjoyed being around the people who came to watch. That's not a strategy for him. It's just who he is. So when he looks at Tiger and sees a man who moved through the same tour, the same courses, the same galleries, and kept himself sealed off from all of it, the contrast is impossible to ignore. Tiger's defenders will tell you that's not arrogance, it's focus. That the mental compartmentalization required to win 14 majors demands a certain kind of separation from everything that isn't the next shot. And there's truth in that. But Daly's point isn't really about whether Tiger's approach was effective. It's about what that approach communicated to everyone around him, to the players who tried to connect with him and got nothing back, to the fans who watched him walk past without acknowledgement, to the caddies, the volunteers, the journalists who learned quickly that Tiger operated on his own terms and nobody else's. Great players earn the right to set their own terms. Daly would probably agree with that. What he seems to push back on is the idea that greatness makes the ordinary rules of human decency optional. You can be the best golfer alive and still look a person in the eye. Tiger, in Daly's telling, often chose not to. And that choice, repeated across a career, is what Daly calls arrogance. Not the confidence, not the ambition, not the winning, the coldness. Jack Nicklaus is the argument. Whenever anyone debates the greatest golfer who ever lived, Nicklaus is the name that comes back hardest. 18 major championships, a career that spanned decades, a record Tiger spent his entire prime chasing and never fully caught. The reverence around Nicklaus in golf circles is close to religious. You don't criticize the Golden Bear. You just don't. John Daly does. Daly's issue with Nicklaus isn't about what he did on the course. He's not disputing the majors, or the legacy, or any of that. What bothers Daly is what Nicklaus does off it. Specifically, the way Nicklaus has always positioned himself as someone whose opinion on the direction of golf matters more than anyone else's. As someone who should have a say in everything, because he always has. Daly said it directly. He's always had a say in everything. The tone isn't admiring. There's a version of Nicklaus's involvement in golf, course design, equipment standards, tournament formats, the general politics of the sport, that reads as a legend giving back, staying engaged, using his credibility to protect the game he loves. Daly knows that version exists. What he seems to resist is the assumption underneath it, that being the greatest player of your era automatically qualifies you to keep shaping the game long after your competitive days are finished. Golf has a particular problem with this. The old guard, players who built their names in a specific era under specific conditions, often treat their own experience as the standard against which everything new should be measured. Change gets filtered through their preferences. Innovation gets approved or dismissed based on whether it fits the world they dominated. Nicklaus, in Daly's view, is the clearest example of that pattern. A man so convinced of his own authority that stepping back never really became an option. Think about the equipment debates Nicklaus has driven across the decades. He's been vocal about rollback proposals, ball distance, shaft technology, consistently pushing the governing bodies toward restrictions that would, conveniently, make the modern game look more like the game he dominated. His course designs reflect the same instinct, long, punishing, built on the assumption that the way golf was played in the 1960s and 1970s is the correct way golf should always be played. There's a difference between protecting the integrity of a sport and shaping it to preserve your own legacy. Daly sees Nicklaus doing the second thing and calling it the first. And when Nicklaus speaks, the sport listens. That's the part that bothers Daly. Not that Nicklaus has opinions. Everyone has opinions. It's that Nicklaus's opinions carry institutional weight just by existing, because of who he is and what he won, regardless of whether those opinions are right. That kind of automatic authority is something you have to earn fresh in Daly's world. You don't just inherit it from 18 majors won 50 years ago. That's not a small thing to say about an 18-major champion, but Daly has never been in the business of saying small things. Greg Norman didn't just play golf. He performed it. The white hat, the shark nickname, the Hollywood looks, and the corporate empire built alongside the tour career. Norman understood brand before most athletes even knew what the word meant in that context. At his peak, in the 1980s and early 1990s, he was the most recognizable golfer on the planet, and he made sure everyone knew it. That kind of presence is magnetic when the results back it up. When they don't, it starts to read differently. John Daly doesn't have a lot of patience for how Norman has carried himself across the decades, and he hasn't been subtle about it. The line Daly keeps returning to is as clean as it gets. Greg's always been about Greg, not about the game, not about the other players, not about anything that doesn't ultimately circle back to Norman's own image, Norman's own interests, Norman's own name on the door. The tension between Daly and Norman runs deeper than two guys who rubbed each other the wrong way on tour. It's a philosophical split. Daly's whole identity is built on the idea that golf belongs to the people who play it and the people who watch it. He's never pretended to be anything other than what he is, a working-class kid from Arkansas who hit the ball a long way and made a lot of mistakes in public. Norman built something closer to a corporation with a golf swing attached. Business ventures, clothing lines, course design deals, the attempted World Golf Tour breakaway in the 1990s that would have fundamentally restructured the sport to suit his vision of what it should be. That breakaway attempt is probably the clearest example of what Daly means when he talks about Norman being about Norman. The World Golf Tour proposal would have concentrated power and prize money among a small group of elite players, Norman's group, at the expense of the broader tour structure that kept the sport accessible. It didn't go through, but the fact that Norman pushed it so hard and so publicly told you exactly where his priorities sat. The game as a vehicle for Greg Norman's advancement, rather than the other way around. Daly watched all of that from the same tour. He saw how Norman operated in rooms, how he talked about other players, how he positioned himself as the indispensable center of whatever conversation golf was having at any given moment. And more recently, Norman's role as the face of LIV Golf. Another seismic restructuring attempt. Another situation where Norman ended up as the man at the top of the new order. Confirmed for Daly that the pattern never really changed. Different decade, same instinct. Find the power, grab it, and make it yours. LIV is worth dwelling on for a second here because of what Norman's role in it reveals. He didn't just join LIV as a player or an ambassador. He became its CEO, its public face, its loudest defender. When criticism came, and it came hard, from players, from fans, from the established tour, Norman absorbed it, deflected it, and kept talking. He called out PGA Tour players who stayed loyal to the established tour. He positioned the breakaway as a liberation movement for golfers who deserved more. What he couldn't quite hide, underneath all of it, was how much he seemed to enjoy being the most important man in the room again. After decades of being golf's former greatest player, LIV handed him a stage, and he took it with both hands. Daly has his own complicated history with LIV and with where professional golf is headed. He doesn't have a clean record on any of this, but his read on Norman is less about the politics and more about the person. A man whose first instinct in every situation is to ask, what's in it for Greg? And then build a narrative around that answer that sounds like it's about everyone else. Greg's always been about Greg. Some quotes stay accurate for 30 years. That one has. Rory McIlroy is, by almost any measure, the best golfer of his generation. 4 major championships before he turned 30. A swing that coaches use as a teaching model. Consistent enough across a decade plus that the conversation around him isn't whether he belongs among the greats. It's whether he eventually catches the greats. Nobody serious disputes his talent. That's not where Daly's problem starts. Where it starts is the talking. Daly has pushed back on McIlroy in a way that's less about what Rory does on the course and more about how freely he speaks off it. Golf politics, tour structures, the LIV situation, the future of the sport, McIlroy has positioned himself as one of the loudest voices on all of it. And Daly has noticed. His comment lands somewhere between dismissive and irritated. He's got a lot to say. Coming from Daly, who has never been shy about his own opinions, that's not a compliment. It's a specific kind of criticism, the kind that says your confidence has outrun your authority. There's a real distinction here worth sitting with. Daly isn't saying McIlroy should be quiet because he's wrong. He's saying McIlroy speaks with the certainty of someone who has already figured out what's best for a sport that's been around a lot longer than his career. That's different from confidence in your own game, which Daly respects. That's confidence in your own judgment about things that affect thousands of people across the entire golf world. And Daly seems to feel like McIlroy wears that confidence a little too easily, a little too early. It's worth remembering that McIlroy went back and forth on the live question in ways that left a lot of people confused about where he actually stood. He was vocal about loyalty to the PGA Tour, then vocal about reunification, then involved in merger talks, then distancing himself from outcomes he'd seemed to endorse. Through all of it, the certainty of his public statements never quite matched the messiness of the situation he was describing. Daly watched that play out and drew his own conclusions. There's also something telling in the way McIlroy talks about players who made different choices. He's not shy about framing his own decisions as the principled ones, and other players' decisions as something lesser. That's a specific kind of confidence. The kind that doesn't just say, "I made the right call," but implies, "and you didn't." Daly has never operated that way. He's made bad calls and admitted it. He's changed his mind and said so. What he hasn't done is dress up personal preference as moral clarity. That gap between them is exactly where Daly's criticism lives. Now, Brooks Koepka is a different kind of target, and Daly's criticism shifts register when the conversation moves to him. Koepka arrived on tour and immediately behaved like someone who had already read the chapter about himself in the history books. 4 majors in a short stretch, a body built for magazine covers, and a media persona constructed almost entirely around the idea that he performs best when the stage is biggest. He doesn't just say he handles pressure well. He says it while staring down the camera, making sure you understand that other players don't handle it the way he does. That's not quiet confidence. That's a very deliberate performance of superiority. Daly's comment about the newer generation, "These guys think they've done it all already," lands squarely on Koepka. Because Koepka talks like legacy is already settled, like the resume is complete enough to justify the attitude. 4 majors is genuinely great. Nobody's taking that away. But the players Daly grew up watching, the ones who built long careers that hold up across decades, didn't talk about themselves the way Koepka talks about himself. They let the game make the argument for them. Daly's relationship with his own legacy is complicated enough that he probably doesn't point fingers easily on that front. But his criticism of Koepka feels less like jealousy and more like a generational disagreement about what it means to earn your place. In Daly's world, you win, you keep showing up, you build something over time, and maybe, eventually, you let other people say the big things about you. Koepka collapsed that process. He decided the big things early and said them himself, loudly, and kept saying them while the career was still unfinished. Part of what makes Koepka's attitude sting, for players like Daly, is that it seems almost calculated. The comments about other sports, the open dismissal of players he considers beneath his level, the way he talks about the regular tour events versus the majors, as if showing up for anything that isn't a Grand Slam is beneath him. All of it feels engineered to project an image rather than describe a reality. Confidence is one thing. Performing confidence for the cameras is something else, and older players tend to know the difference. That's not a new phenomenon in sports, but golf, historically, has held itself to a different standard of comportment. Daly, of all people, has broken plenty of those unwritten rules himself. But there's a specific rule he's never broken. He's never told the world he was great before the world agreed. Koepka skipped that step entirely, and Daly hasn't forgotten it. Patrick Reed is the most uncomfortable name on this list, because the discomfort around him isn't really about arrogance in the traditional sense. It's about something closer to impunity. The sense that Reed operates by a set of rules he wrote himself, and the consequences that would follow anyone else simply haven't followed him. 4 majors in, Koepka talks like the work is done. Reed talks like the rules don't apply. Those are related attitudes, but they're not the same thing, and Reed's version runs deeper. Daly hasn't always aimed directly at Reed by name, but the shape of his comments fits Reed precisely. There's guys out there people don't like for a reason. That's not a vague observation. It's a specific kind of verdict, the kind you deliver when the evidence has been building long enough that naming it feels almost unnecessary. Everyone in the room already knows who you mean.
Reed's career has been shadowed by incidents that other players quietly reference and rarely discuss publicly. Rules controversies. A reputation among tour peers that doesn't match the one he performs for cameras. A Masters win in 2018 that was genuine, and a relationship with the rest of the tour that never quite recovered from everything surrounding it. He didn't just cultivate an outsider image, he seemed to genuinely alienate the inside.
What's striking about Reed is that the attitude never softened. Most players, when things get rocky enough, when enough peers have quietly distanced themselves, when enough controversies have stacked up, at least adjust the volume. They find a way to dial back the persona, if only to protect what's left. Reed never did that. He leaned in harder, moved to live, and kept presenting himself as misunderstood rather than accountable. There's a word for that pattern in golf circles, and it's not resilience. Daly's instinct has always been to call the thing what it is. He's been disliked himself at various points for various reasons. He knows what it feels like to have a reputation that precedes you. The difference, in his telling, is that he owned his mistakes. Reed's version of arrogance is the kind that never admits the mistakes exist. And what Reed represents, in that telling, is arrogance without the mitigating grace of being universally liked, or universally respected, or even universally understood. Just the attitude, standing alone. 6 names. 6 different versions of the same core problem. The belief that greatness puts you above the game instead of inside it. Daly's never been perfect, but he's always been present, always been human, and always talked to people. Maybe that's the whole lesson. Subscribe for more stories like this, and drop your thoughts on Daly in the comments.
What do you think of Tiger as a player, and then personally?
Personally, I don't know him. Even though we live half a mile from each other, I wouldn't have said one word to Tiger Woods in 10 years.
Greg Norman stood at the peak of golf for 331 weeks. He was jealous is what the great white shark claimed about rivals who blocked his vision. 2 Open championships, a global brand that made him richer than most players could dream, and a personality that filled arenas. He changed how golfers thought about money and power. His charisma was undeniable. His business instincts were sharp. But this is not just about success. This is about what happens when one man decides that everyone who disagrees must be driven by envy. Greg Norman claims 7 golfers were jealous of what he built, but the evidence reveals something different. This was not jealousy. This was a 30-year war over who controls professional golf. And the list is longer than 7. Before we dive in, use the hype feature and give hype to this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this. Now let us get into the 14 people who stood in Norman's way. Recent events show how this ends. In late 2024 and into 2025, Nick Faldo called the LIV circuit meaningless. Then in mid-January 2025, the league Norman built replaced him as chief executive. Scott O'Neill took the job. Norman moved to a supportive role. By 2026, one critic remains on air while Norman has been moved aside. To understand how it got here, rewind 3 decades. November 1994. That is when Norman first tried to break the system. That is when the vendetta began. Number 14. The PGA Tour establishment. This is not one person, this is the entire machine. Norman proposed the World Golf Tour in 1994 at Sherwood Country Club. 30 elite players, 8 high-stakes events, bigger purses, global reach. The tour responded with a memo. Commissioner Tim Fincham warned players that joining any renegade event would mean immediate suspension. The threat worked. The proposal died. Norman's supporters called it a guillotine. The tour called it protecting the game. The numbers tell the story. In 1994, a PGA Tour winner took home $216,000 on average. Norman's plan offered $600,000. Last place in a traditional event meant nothing if you missed the cut. Norman's plan guaranteed $30,000 even for finishing last. The gap was massive. The tour framed this as greed. Norman framed it as player rights. Fast forward to 2022. LIV Golf launched with Saudi money. The tour fought back with bans, legal threats, and ranking manipulation. Norman called it jealousy. The tour called it self-defense. But here is the twist. The tour eventually adopted Norman's global vision through the World Golf Championships. They took his idea, rebranded it, and acted like it was theirs. That irony fueled Norman's resentment for decades. The establishment won the battle in '94. They thought they won the war in 2022, but the fight left scars across the entire sport. Number 13. Gary Player, a legend who trained with Norman, a mentor who watched him rise. Player went public with a harsh word, vendetta. He said Norman has carried a vendetta against the PGA Tour since 1994. Player believes Norman's revenge mission hurt the sport more than it helped. He expressed disappointment in someone he once admired. This was not business criticism. This was personal betrayal. Player saw Norman's crusade as a failure of sportsmanship. He called it a pity. Norman dismissed these concerns. He said Player did not understand the bigger picture, but the accusation stuck. It framed Norman's entire LIV project as score settling instead of innovation. When a fellow legend calls your life's work a grudge, that label is hard to shake. Number 12. Tom Watson. Watson wrote an open letter in 2023. He expressed pain and anger over the merger talks and the source of LIV's funding. Watson did not argue about economics. He argued about morality. He said the sanctity of the game mattered more than profit. Norman's response was cold. He said political reasons should not stop the game from growing. Watson saw this as proof Norman had lost his soul. Norman saw Watson as stuck in the past. This clash was deeper than strategy. It was about what golf should mean. Watson represented tradition and ethics. Norman represented disruption and dollars. Neither side could understand the other. Watson's letter became a rallying cry for those who felt the game was being sold. Norman's dismissal confirmed their worst fears about him. Number 11, Billy Horschel. Horschel criticized LIV players who wanted to return to the PGA Tour after taking massive signing fees. He called it hypocrisy. Norman fired back with a claim that Horschel had privately shown interest in LIV. Norman suggested Horschel's public loyalty was theater. This exchange revealed the transactional nature of the conflict. Norman believed many players secretly wanted LIV's money, but feared the backlash. Horschel represented those who felt defectors should not benefit from both systems. The rank-and-file membership agreed with Horschel. They saw LIV jumpers as betrayers. Norman saw them as afraid of institutional punishment. This was jealousy in reverse. Norman claimed they envied the freedom LIV offered, but lacked the courage to take it. The accusation cut deep because it might have been partially true. Number 10, Tim Finchem, the commissioner who killed the World Golf Tour. Finchem's 1994 memo threatened suspensions and legal action. Norman called it propaganda and bullying. Finchem called it protecting the membership. Finchem ran a tax-exempt charity model, spreading money across the full player base. Norman wanted a corporate-backed elite tour, paying stars what they were worth. Finchem won that fight. Years later, he adopted Norman's concept through the World Golf Championships. He took the global tour idea and made it his own. Norman watched the man who crushed his dream implement a watered-down version. That betrayal burned. Finchem framed himself as defender of the collective good. Norman framed him as a monopolist afraid of competition. Both had truth, but only one held power in 1994. Number 9, Fred Couples. Known for being easygoing, Couples delivered one of the harshest insults of the LIV era. He called Norman a tool for his backers. The word was deliberate. It suggested Norman had no agency, that he was just a puppet for Saudi money. Couples represented the locker room culture Norman disrupted. The traditions, the camaraderie. Norman's pursuit looked mercenary to Couples. Norman dismissed it as lack of vision, but the tool label stuck. It reduced Norman from visionary to hired gun. That image hurt Norman's legacy. Couples spoke for players who valued friendship over finance. Norman could not comprehend that mindset. Number 8, Davis Love III. Love was present at the 1994 meetings, where the line was drawn against Norman. He remembered that fight. When Liv launched, Love became one of its loudest critics. He called it a closed shop. He accused Norman of lying to players about consequences. Love defended the tour's collective identity and charitable mission. He said Norman undermined both. Love saw Norman as a recurring threat to everything the tour built over 50 years. Norman saw Love as a defender of a broken system. Love argued the tour's strength came from its membership structure. Norman argued that structure exploited top players. Love believes in the common good. Norman believes in individual rights. These philosophies cannot coexist. Love never trusted Norman after 94. LIV confirmed all his worst suspicions. Number 7, Arnold Palmer. Palmer passed away before LIV existed, but his role in the 1994 conflict shaped everything that followed. Palmer was the architect of the blockade against the World Golf Tour. He told Norman in a private meeting that the plan was over. Palmer argued the PGA Tour existed to benefit the entire membership, not just elite stars. Norman saw this as Palmer protecting his own commercial interests and legacy. Palmer helped build the modern tour. Norman wanted to replace it. Palmer viewed Norman's proposal as a threat to his life's work. Norman viewed Palmer's opposition as jealousy of his ability to create something bigger. The disagreement established a template. The establishment would frame opposition as defending the common good. Norman would frame it as envy. Palmer's speech killed the World Golf Tour. Norman never forgave him. That grudge carried into the LIV era, even though Palmer was gone. The ghost of Palmer's rejection haunted every move Norman made. Number 6, Jack Nicklaus. The Golden Bear was Norman's mentor. Their relationship broke over LIV. Norman claimed Nicklaus blessed the LIV concept in a private email. He said Nicklaus wrote that it was good for the game. Nicklaus denied this completely. He clarified that he rejected a $100 million offer to join LIV. He said any early meetings were professional courtesy. Norman weaponized their private conversations. He called Nicklaus a hypocrite with a short memory. This violated the unwritten code of respect between legends. You do not air private discussions. You do not attack your mentor publicly. Norman did both. The move alienated him from the game's historical elite. It reinforced the perception that Norman cared more about his vendetta than his relationships. Nicklaus represented everything Norman once aspired to be. Breaking that bond showed how far Norman was willing to go. The cost was steep. Norman gained a talking point. He lost a legend's respect. By any measure, that trade was a loss. Number 5, Brandel Chambly. A Golf Channel analyst who became Norman's loudest media critic. Chambly questioned the ethics of LIV's funding. He challenged the threat to the game's sanctity. Norman responded by calling Chambly a paid talking bobblehead. The insult revealed Norman's intolerance for media scrutiny he could not control. Then Chambly released a private text. In it, Norman had praised Chambly's refreshing honesty. The leak exposed a pattern. Norman loved honesty when it served him. He hated it when it did not. Chambly demonstrated that Norman demanded agreement, not discourse. This was the most damaging moment in the narrative war. It painted Norman as someone who could not handle criticism. By 2026, Chambly remained a prominent voice in golf media. Norman had transitioned out of his chief executive role. The symbolism was clear. The critic outlasted the disruptor. Norman tried to silence Chambly with insults. Chambly responded with evidence. In the court of public opinion, evidence won. Number 4. Jon Rahm. Rahm's story is unique. He joined LIV but still resented Norman's leadership. Before defecting, Rahm called LIV a retirement plan for seasoned golfers. That label challenged Norman's narrative of a competitive revolution. Even after Rahm took the money and jumped, he was reportedly happy when Norman got replaced by Scott O'Neill. This reveals something crucial. The resentment toward Norman existed inside his own organization. Rahm focused his criticism on the bad blood and rhetoric Norman generated. He felt it prevented unification of the sport. This is the second-order insight. Norman's combative style worked for initial disruption. It became a liability when the league needed institutional stability. Rahm wanted a professional operation. Norman gave him a personal crusade. That disconnect created internal dissent. When your own players celebrate your removal, the jealousy narrative falls apart. Rahm proved you could support LIV's concept while rejecting Norman's execution. Number 3. Nick Faldo. The rivalry started on the course. 1996. Masters. Faldo overcame a 6-stroke deficit to beat Norman. That collapse haunted Norman for decades. The feud resurfaced in the broadcast booth. Late 2024 and into 2025, Faldo used his platform to call LIV meaningless. Norman viewed this as disrespect for the players who joined. From Norman's perspective, Faldo's comments were part of the establishment's effort to invalidate his achievements. The psychological weight of the 96 collapse ensures any criticism from Faldo feels personal. Faldo's traditionalist stance reinforced the wall between old guard and new world. Norman could never separate Faldo's current opinions from their past battles. Every dismissive comment from Faldo became another reminder of that Masters Sunday. Norman turned professional disagreement into personal vendetta. Faldo remained unbothered. That imbalance defined their dynamic. Norman cared too much. Faldo did not care enough. The power lay with the one who could walk away. Number 2. Rory McIlroy. In early 2022, the two shared a brief reconciliation. McIlroy offered respect for Norman's past greatness after watching a documentary about the 96 Masters collapse. That piece shattered when Norman publicly called McIlroy brainwashed by the PGA Tour. McIlroy responded by making it his business to be a persistent obstacle. He frequently called for Norman's exit. He wanted adults in the room to negotiate. McIlroy's resentment came from a belief that Norman prioritized his own legacy over the health of the game. Norman claimed he paid zero attention to McIlroy's comments. That dismissal was a tactic to minimize McIlroy's standing. It failed. McIlroy became the face of tour loyalty. Norman became the face of disruption. Their public feud was a proxy war for the entire conflict. McIlroy used statistics and milestones as weapons. Norman used insults and deflection. The cycle fed itself. Every exchange made reconciliation less likely. McIlroy wanted Norman gone. Norman wanted McIlroy silenced. Neither got what they wanted. The stalemate lasted until January 2025, when the league finally moved Norman aside. Number 1. Tiger Woods. The institutional wall. Woods represents the biggest obstacle to Norman's disruptor legacy. As the face of the PGA Tour for over 2 decades, Woods carries both symbolic and structural power. Woods believes the LIV model devalues the historical achievements he spent his career building. He was unequivocal in his call for Norman's removal. Woods stated that no meaningful dialogue could occur while Norman led LIV. The Norman camp interprets this as institutional jealousy. Woods is a primary stakeholder in the current system. He cannot tolerate a rival power structure where he lacks leverage. Woods' involvement in the TGL and his role on the Tour Policy Board entrench him as the guardian of the establishment. He positions himself in direct opposition to Norman's independent contractor philosophy. Woods met Norman when he was 15. They shared practice rounds. Butch Harmon connected them. Norman even mocked Woods after an Australia round early in Tiger's career. The relationship had history, but when Live launched, all that history meant nothing. Woods chose the system that made him. Norman chose to break it. That choice created an unbridgeable gap. Woods wanted Norman out of golf leadership. Norman wanted Woods to admit the tour exploited its players. Neither would bend. The collision of these two legacies became the central drama of the golf civil war. Woods won. Norman lost his job. The biggest collision came in waves. The bans. The public campaigns for Norman to step aside. The talk of needing adults in the room. The 2023 framework agreement that left Norman out. Then in mid-January 2025, LIV Golf made it official. Scott O'Neill became chief executive. Norman moved to a supportive role. O'Neill came from the NBA, NFL, and NHL. His mission was profitability and institutional normalization. Norman's mission had been market disruption and revenge. O'Neill spoke about mending fences. Norman spoke about player rights. O'Neill wanted 72-hole formats and ranking points. Norman championed 54-hole innovation. O'Neill focused on television ratings. Norman focused on beating the PGA Tour. The shift proved a hard truth. The qualities that let Norman launch a renegade tour prevented him from integrating it. His ego worked for disruption but failed at diplomacy. His aggression started the war but could not end it. His refusal to back down made him a symbol but also a liability. By 2026, Norman's quiet exit marked the end of an era. The cost of this war is measurable. Fractured relationships, lost ranking points for LIV players, personal alienation from the game's icons. Norman built an architecture of resentment over 30 years. That architecture became the cage that limited his ability to grow the game beyond his vendetta. But golf survived. The sport moved forward. Viewers got to watch incredible talent on both tours. The LIV experiment forced the PGA Tour to increase purses and rethink its model. Norman's disruption created change, even if he was not there to see it through. The 14 people on this list won the narrative battle. They remain the gatekeepers. Norman got moved aside, but his fingerprints are on the future whether anyone wants to admit it. So what is the legacy? Was it jealousy? Was it principle? Was it power? Probably all three. Norman believed everyone who opposed him was envious. Some were, but most had legitimate disagreements about how the game should work. Norman loved honesty until it was aimed at him. He demanded loyalty but gave a tax. He wanted respect but burned bridges. The great white shark changed professional golf forever. The cost was higher than expected. The question is simple. Was it worth it? If you made it this far, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment with your thoughts on Greg Norman's legacy. We will see you in the next one.